In Volume 1 of The War in the West, your book series on World War II, you write, "The Second World War witnessed the deaths of more than 60 million people from over 60 different countries. Entire cities were laid waste. National borders were redrawn, and many millions more people found themselves displaced. Over the past couple of decades, many of those living in the Middle East or parts of Africa, the Balkans, Afghanistan, and even the United States may feel, justifiably, that these troubled times have already proved the most traumatic in their recent past. Yet, globally, the Second World War was and remains the single biggest catastrophe of modern history. In terms of human drama, it is unrivaled. No other war has affected so many lives in such a large number of countries." So, what to you makes World War II the biggest catastrophe in human drama in modern history? And maybe from a historian perspective, the most fascinating subject to study?
The thing about World War II is it really is truly global. You know, it's fought in deserts, it's fought in the Arctic, it's fought across oceans, it's fought in the air, it's in jungle, it's in the hills. It is on the beaches. It's also on the Russian steppe, and it's also in Ukraine. So it's that global nature of it. And I just think, you know, where there's war, there is always incredible human drama. And I think for most people, and certainly the true in my case, you get drawn to the human drama of it. It's that thought that, you know, gosh, if I'd been 20 years old, how would I have dealt with it? You know, would I have been in the army? Would I have been in the Air Force? Would I have been on a, Royal Navy destroyer? Or, how would I have coped with it? And how would I have dealt with that separation? I mean, I've interviewed people who were away for 4 years. I remember talking to a tank man from Liverpool in England called Sam Bradshaw. And he went away for 4 years. And when he came home, he'd been twice wounded. He'd been very badly wounded in North Africa. And then he was shot in the neck in Italy, eventually got home. And when he came home, his mother had turned grey. His little baby sister, who had been, 13 when he left, was now a young woman. His old school had been destroyed by Luftwaffe bombs. He didn't recognize the place. And do you know what he did? He joined up again, went back out of Europe, and was one of the first people in Belsen. So,
What was his justification for that, for joining right back?
He just felt completely disconnected to home. He felt that the gulf of time, his experiences had separated him from all the normalities of life. And he felt that the normalities of the life that he had known before he'd gone away to war had just been severed in a really kind of cruel way that he didn't really feel he was able to confront at that particular point. But he decided to rejoin, couldn't go back to the 3rd Royal Tank Regiment, so went back to a different unit. Went from kind of the Italian campaign to European theatre. Didn't see so much action at the end, but, like a lot of British troops, if you were in a certain division at a certain time, you ended up passing very close to Belsen, and, you suddenly realised, okay, this was the right thing to do. We did have to get rid of Nazism. We did have to do this because this is the consequence. It's not just the oppression. It's just not just the secret police. It's not just the expansionism of Nazism. It is also, the Holocaust, which hadn't been given its name at that point. But you're witnessing this kind of untold cruelty. And I always, I've always sort of, I think a lot about Sam. I mean, he's no longer with us, but he was one of the kind of first people that I interviewed, and I interviewed him at great length. And I know you like a long interview, Lex, and I totally get that. Because when you have a long interview, you really start getting to the nuts and bolts of it. One of the frustrations for me when I'm looking at oral histories of Second World War vets is usually they're kind of, they're put on YouTube or they're put on a museum website. They're 30 minutes, an hour if you're lucky, and you're just scratching the surface. You never really get to know it, and you feel that they're just repeating kind of stuff they've read in books themselves after the war and stuff. And I was kind of leave feeling frustrated that I haven't had a chance to kind of grill them on the kind of stuff that I would grill them on if I was put in front of them.
So Tank Man, what was maybe the most epic, the most intense, or the most interesting story that he told you?
Well, I do remember him telling me, funny enough, it's not really about the conflict. I remember him telling me about the importance of letters. And there was this guy who literally every few weeks. Post would arrive intermittently. There was no kind of sort of regular post. So it was supposed to be regular, but it didn't come around regularly. So you might suddenly get a flurry of 5 all in one day. But he said there was this guy and in his tank, a member of a different tank crew. He was a good friend of his in the same squadron. British have squadrons for their armor, and which is Americans would have a company.
I should say that in your book, one of the wonderful things you do is you use the correct term in the language for the particular army involved, whether it's the German or the British or the American.
Well, that's not to be pretentious. That's really just so that because you're dealing with so many numbers and different units, and it can go over your head, and you can get sort of consumed by the detail if you're not careful. And as a reader, it can be very unsatisfying because you just can't keep pace with everything. So one of the things about writing in the vernacular German or in the American spelling Armor rather than Armauer, as we Brits would spell it, is it just immediately tells the reader, okay, this is American, okay, I've got that, or this is German, I've got that, or Italian, or whatever it might be. But to go back to Sam. So Sam, there was this guy in his squadron, and he'd get his letters from his girlfriend, his wife, and he said it was like a soap opera. He said we all just waited for his letters to come in so we could find out, whether his daughter had, got to school okay or something, won the swimming contest or whatever it was. The sort of details of this sort of day-to-day kind of banal life was just absolute catnip to these guys. They absolutely loved it. And then the letter arrived, the Dear John letter, saying, sorry, I found someone else and it's over. And his friend was just absolutely devastated. It was the only thing that was keeping him going, this sort of sense of this sort of continuity of home, this sort of this foundation of his life back at home. And Sam said he could see he was in a really, really bad way. Mm-hmm. And he thought, he's going to do something stupid. And he went up to him and he said, look, I know it's bad and I know it's terrible and I know you're absolutely devastated, but you've got your mates here. Just don't do anything silly. Just, maybe when it's all over, you can patch things up or sort things out. And he said, you've got to understand it from her point of view. It's a long way. You haven't seen you for 2 years, this kind of stuff, so just don't do anything rash. And of course, the next engagement, 2 days later, he was killed. And he said it was just a kind of, he just knew that was going to happen. So it was a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. That's something I've never forgotten, that story. And I just thought, it's about human drama. That's the truth of it. And how people react to this totally alien situation. For the most part, the Second World War is fought by ordinary, everyday people doing extraordinary things. And I think that's something that's so fascinating. I suspect, I think instinctively, I'm quite slapdash, I think. So I think I'd have bought it, literally. I don't think it would have ended well for me. I'm just a bit careless.
Yeah. I think I also have an element in me where I can believe in the idea of nation and fight for a nation, especially when the conflict is as grand.
There are things worse than death.
Yes, as the propaganda would explain very clearly, but also in reality, yes. So a nation, France, Britain was, maybe facing the prospect of being essentially enslaved. The Soviet Union was facing the prospect of being enslaved, literally. I mean, it was very, very clearly stated what they're going to do. They're going to repopulate the land with Germanic people. So,
well, they're not just going to do that. They're also going to starve lots and lots of Soviet individuals to death. By the Hunger Plan, for example, which is planned, really very casually and not by the, this is not SS units or anything like this. This is the Wehrmacht. This is the economic division of the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the German Combined General Staff. General Georg Thomas comes up, and Hermann Bacher, they come up with who's the kind of Minister for Food. They come up, what are we going to do? We haven't got enough food, largely because German farming is inefficient, and they think, well, this is part of Lebensraum. We'll go in and we'll take the food. And there's been this colossal urbanization of the Soviet Union since the revolution in 1917. So they're just not going to get their food, these people in these cities, because we're going to take it all, and that's going to lead to a lot of deaths, umpteen millions is the phrase that Georg Thomas used.